Josh Silver is director of Represent.us. They're the group that works to get money out of politics as well, and we've covered them on the show before. And Josh is putting together the Unrig Summit, and that's what we're going to explain what that is today. And Max Carver is in the studio. Max, great to have you here, man.
Thank you for having me.
All right, so Max, if you don't know, is on the television series Desperate Housewives, MTV's teen horror drama Teen Wolf, and was on The Leftovers as well on HBO. So that's awesome. So I'm going to go to Josh to explain what the Unrig Summit is. But before I do that, you're in the studio. Okay. You're an actor. You know, you're. There's 1,000 things you could do. You could be going to parties, having a good time. I don't know. That's like the BS stereotype of actors, like just having nothing but fun.
Fair enough.
Right. Why do you care about this issue? Why did you want to get involved?
Well, I grew up in Northern California, and my stepdad always talked. We had a lot of conversations about politics around the table, but it always came to a head. The conversation always ended with, well, we can't really do anything without addressing campaign finance reform and corruption in politics. So I'd say 2 years ago, I got involved with Bernie Sanders because he was kind of the first politician that appealed to campaign finance reform, and I love the way he ran his campaign. I was a surrogate. And I had a lot of energy, particularly in 2017, that I didn't know what to do with. For me, it's always about finding both an action, a reasonable action to take, and something that's effective. I met with Josh, I met with Represent.us, and their plan just made a hell of a lot of sense to me. The way it's modeled after certain movements like marriage equality or even right to work, which isn't my favorite, obviously. It's a plan that makes sense. It can be done on a community level, in a city, in a county, at a state level, and it's a bigger picture. So I know exactly what to do. I know where my money's going, and I believe it's going to really impact other movements I believe in.
All right, that's awesome. So Josh, look, I want to talk about Represent.us too, but first, let's ask you about the Unrig conference. So what is that? Who's going? When is it? Hit us.
Hey guys, it's good to be on the show. It's February 2nd, 3rd, and 4th in New Orleans. We decided we want to have a fun time and fix democracy. It's going to be what we believe is going to be the largest gathering of people ever assembled to fix our rigged political system. We've got amazing people like Max. We've got Jennifer Lawrence, Adam McKay. We've got amazing musicians, a lot of local talent from New Orleans. And it's going to be awesome. And the goal is two things. One is to get everybody together in the country who cares about this issue and learn about the exciting fronts for reform, because there's many all across the country, in the city level, the state level, the county level. And also to show the country that there's this movement growing that Wolfpack is part of, that Represent.us is part of, and that many other groups are part of. And we're going to do it February 2nd, 3rd, and 4th, and you can learn about it at unrigsummit.com.
Yeah, so we have the links below, by the way. If you guys are watching on YouTube, go to the description box. If you're watching on Facebook, it'll be in the comments section. And by the way, I'm also going, as you can tell from there. Nina Turner and Larry Lessig, all the great folks involved in getting money out of politics. And Larry's like the godfather of the movement. It's great to have there. By the way, there'll be some disagreements there, a little bit of drama, right? But that's good. You should air it out. And if you notice, there's Richard Painter on that picture. He's a conservative. So Josh, there's going to be conservatives there as well?
There is, and here's the thing, Cenk. I mean, you know this, but a lot of people don't realize there's like two fundamental truisms, and I think Max kind of alluded to it, but didn't say it outright, which is that the broken and dysfunctional politics that represent America in 2018, the deep polarization, it's almost a political civil war. This is not natural. It's not just coincidental. It's because the way candidates run for office, the way we vote, and the way politicians govern once in office, the system is fundamentally broken, largely eroded and broken by special interest lobbyists, moneyed lobbyists who have allowed campaign finance to auction off our democracy. But also the reality is that gets us to the second thing, which it's not just money in politics, although that's very important. But the way we vote actually creates this winner-take-all system where very often the person with fewer votes wins, leaves more than 50% of the electorate alienated, feeling like their vote doesn't matter. The Electoral College makes it so votes don't matter in 42 states for the presidential race. I mean, we have these fundamentally broken system of both campaign finance, ethics, and elections. And the folks coming together in New Orleans are going to talk about all of it. And we're not going to talk about things like abortion or gay marriage, the stuff that typically wedges conservatives and progressives. We're going to leave that aside in New Orleans. And we're going to talk about what we agree on and what we disagree on in the democracy movement. And that's exciting.
The disagreements sometimes are about how do you get to the right result and what exactly the right result is. So I know through our experience at Wolfpack that conservatives are largely on our side. If you ask them, is the system rigged? They'll say, absolutely. Are the politicians corrupt? Absolutely. Do the politicians serve their donors instead of their voters? Absolutely. Easily over 80% of Republicans believe that. I think it's actually over 90%. 93% of all Americans think that people represent, the politicians represent their donors over their voters. So did you, Max, I want to turn to you and then of course, Josh, I'm going to come back to you about represent us and what your guys' strategy is. So Max, when you were a surrogate for Bernie Sanders, there's a lot of issues that people cared about. Medicare for all, $15 minimum wage, et cetera. Did you get a sense of how much this issue animates people?
I would say it was up there. I did a lot of canvassing. I went to a lot of campuses to register young voters, and campaign finance reform, surprisingly, there wasn't really language to talk about it. People didn't know that was the issue, but certainly corruption came up a fair bit. People, the average, I think, what was it, $27? Was that the average donation? Yep. When that was mentioned, people perked up because, again, it wasn't money coming from lobbyist groups, it was from the people. You know,
Max, that's a great point because I think that Democrats purposely don't use the right word. And the right word is corruption. And they don't use it because they don't want to talk about their big donors. And that's why guys like Bernie Sanders drives them crazy because he's got the small donors and so he can talk about the corruption. And they're like, shush, right? So one of the people that was going to go to this event was Alison Hartzink because she was the national director of Wolfpack. Mike Mineta is going to go instead now. He is the other national director. Well, now he's the sole national director of Wolfpack. But Alison's now running against Dianne Feinstein. Dianne Feinstein is a senator from California. She's supposed to be part of the resistance. Why isn't she talking about the #1 issue, Trump's corruption? That he just devastated the environment. Today, they are now allowing for drilling off the coast of the Pacific Ocean, Atlantic Ocean, Arctic. And why is he doing it? To help his donors. But Feinstein and other Democrats won't talk about it because they also have the same donors. So this is not Democrats versus Republicans. This is Democrats and Republicans versus us. So that's my take on it. Everybody has a slightly different opinion. Some of the groups are more friendly to Democrats, whatever. But we'll sort that out when we get down to New Orleans. And so I think it's both productive and could be really interesting to watch. So Josh, you organize this, but your group has a particular take as well. So what does Represent Us shoot for?
Well, I'm going to tell you that. Before I do, though, to what you said, 2 quick statistics. Number 1, only 28% of Americans are registered Republicans. 28% are Democrats, and 41% are independents. Think about that. Now, consider when you ask the American people, are you liberal? Are you conservative? Are you moderate? 25% are liberal, 38% are moderate, and 36% are conservative. So the reality is that what's happened is there's a massive disconnect between grassroots conservatives in the Republican Party and grassroots progressives and the Democratic Party. And we are constantly stuck, thanks largely to the mainstream media and special interest donors, in this fake fight between Democrats and Republicans, as if that's the range of debate. And I know, Cenk, you talk about that all the time. But we have to remember that and hold that as we take to the states, with our strategy being, let's just go win in cities and counties and states through ballot initiatives, through lobbying city councils, through lobbying county commissions, and win whenever and however we can. That is creating public funding of elections through a new law. That is passing a resolution calling for the 28th Amendment to get money out of politics, says money doesn't equal speech. That would be open primary, so everybody votes in every primary. Ranked choice voting, so that you can choose your top 3 choices for candidates, and then you don't have the spoiler problem. It's no longer the lesser of 2 evils. Transparency, full transparency in all elections. The list goes on. There's dozens of reforms that are happening today in cities and states all across the country that most of your viewers probably don't even know about, but you'll learn about by going to represent us, by going to the summit and learning how to unrig it with other Americans across the country and having a good time. That's the strategy, and that's what we're up to. And folks need to remember, we're not going to win on any issue you care about, whether you care about the climate, whether you care about education, whether you care about healthcare, poverty. We are DOA until we fix the system and unrig it and make it work for regular people.
I fight conservatives on a daily basis. I don't agree with them. I don't agree with them on 9 out of 10 issues, but this is the one issue we do agree on. And they have some interesting ideas. So when Wolfpack got some of the Republican legislatures to pass a resolution calling for free and fair elections. Number one, do Republicans want free and fair elections? Yeah, they do. The actual voters, of course they do. They're Americans. They believe in America. And they have some local legislators have some interesting ideas. For example, maybe you shouldn't. Some of them still think, no, I think money is speech. I disagree, but that's okay. But they say we shouldn't allow anyone who's not in the state to donate. Well, what do they have to do with our state? Why is somebody coming in from out of New Hampshire and trying to affect elections in New Hampshire? Well, that's a perfectly great point. So let's consider that. And by the way, if we had a convention, those are the things that we would consider and how you fix the system, or as Josh puts it, unrig the system. So, when it talking about the local laws, I want to talk about South Dakota, an issue that you guys fought on and are still fighting on. That's really important and interesting. Before we do that, I want to turn to Max again. So you're working on the Bernie campaign, you're doing the surrogate, you're doing all this work. How did you guys find each other, right? How did you get hooked up with Represent Us? And because that's going in deep and trying to fix the system,
right,
which I love. So I'm curious how you got there.
Well, again, I think it's important to I guess how I approach this stuff is to show up and learn as much as I can, listen, find out an action to take, and then I'm very vocal about it. That's a nice thing. You know, I'm a normal guy, but I do have a social media presence, and I have friends who follow me who work in Hollywood, all walks of life. My brother's a firefighter, it doesn't matter. Typically, because I'm vocal, I then get back through word of mouth incredible opportunities, and my friend Susie actually invited me to meet with Josh personally. It was kind of a small group, and it was really what I'd been talking to was kind of this question I had, and I walked into the answer. I mean, Josh made a very strong presentation about campaign finance reform and election reform, as he said, and it was apolitical. I mean, it was really above partisanship, and that's what appealed to me, because when I was out on the road with Bernie and meeting with folks, again, if you put the politics aside, if you put leftist, libtard one way, Republican, conservative the other way, and you didn't approach it, you said, what do you care about? What are the main issues you care about? The 3 things you care about. It was generally the same thing: my family, security, well-being, and then to be represented. And again, if you approach this above partisanship, if you get rid of that language and really it's about fixing the system, like Josh said, that just doesn't work, then I don't know, it appealed to me, so I wanted to get involved.
That's exactly right. That's why the name Represent Us makes sense. Part of the reason, by the way, the Justice Democrats were named Justice is because you should represent just us and not your donors, not your big corporate donors. And we've lost that. It's clear that we've lost that in America. And unfortunately, a lot of times, to make it even more nonpartisan, at the state level, a lot of times it's Democrats who fight harder than Republicans to keep money in politics. I know that that's a really disappointing fact, but it's true. And so we've got to get past the establishment who are hooked on the money and do it and actually get our democracy back. But we can do it. So one of the ways that you were trying to do it, Josh, in South Dakota is a ballot measure. So tell us what happened there and what the future of that fight is.
Oh boy, and I know, Cenk, you were just as angry about this as anybody. Last year, the people of South Dakota, with some help from us and other organizations, put an anti-corruption act on the ballot as a ballot initiative in South Dakota. It's the 4th most corrupt state in the country, according to the Center for Public Integrity. The only state in the country it's perfectly legal to give secret, unlimited gifts to politicians. Really think about that for a second. We passed a common sense law that said you can't give secret, unlimited gifts. All money in politics has to be transparent. Lowers contribution limits, creates lobbyist limits in terms of how much money they can give the committees that they're actually regulate their industry. It created publicly funded campaigns, which is pretty remarkable when you consider that it passed. It passed in a state that went 2-1 for Trump over Hillary Clinton. 2 months later, the South Dakota state legislature and the governor repealed the law outright. They repealed it completely, right, defying the people of South Dakota. Democracy be damned. And what's exciting about that, it's both depressing and exciting. What's exciting is that fast forward about a year and a half, and here we are in the beginning of 2018. The people of South Dakota just submitted the signatures to put the South Dakota constitutional amendment on the ballot as an initiative that would do what the previous act did. Plus, it would say, hey, you legislature and governor, you can't repeal laws outright like that anymore. And it's not touchable by the legislature. So if we win, and in fact, the South Dakota Secretary of State approved it to the ballot last week. And if we win this November, that will be the law in perpetuity, and there's nothing the legislature can do about it. So that's another example of how, if we win, we're going to see, and there's ballot initiatives in Missouri for campaign finance and redistricting reform, Alaska and North Dakota likely for campaign finance and ethics. We're seeing automatic voter registration likely on the ballot in Arizona, definitely in Nevada, ethics reform in New Mexico. Folks, there's stuff happening. It's really exciting. And that's really what the summit is all about, is pulling all these disparate people together and showing we're part of one family. There are liberals there, there are conservatives there, and it is so empowering when you put aside the partisanship and the inner scene wars that we have with these folks and say, you know what, we agree on this, let's work together. And that's what we're going to do in New Orleans.
Yeah, just earlier in the week on this show, I interviewed Katie Fahey, who's looking to get rid of gerrymandering in Michigan and organize a grassroots effort that's amazing with thousands of volunteers. So in your neck of the woods, get involved in any way that you can. Obviously, if you can make it to New Orleans, unrigsummit.com, that's where we're all gonna gather to try to sort this issue out. But I wanna stay on South Dakota for one more second there, Josh. You're calmer about it than I am. I mean, it made my blood boil when the voters said, yeah, this is what we want. We want to end the corruption. And the politicians were like, nah, I don't care. I don't care about your ballot initiative, and I don't care about your stinking democracy. I want to be corrupt. So I'm going to overturn your effort to uncorrupt me. I've never seen anything like that. I felt like it broke every record there was. And I think, did they take a picture afterwards, like after they repealed the law with like their watches that they got from lobbyists or something?
You should show your viewers. Yeah, and the reality is, Cenk, you just nailed it with the gerrymandering issue. There's no competition in South Dakota politics. The politicians literally don't get any real competition in the general election, so they're not afraid. And that's, people wonder, why is it legal for people in America to buy guns even if you're on the international terrorist watch list? It's because of gerrymandering. 86% of US House races are uncompetitive, which means in the general election, there's no competition. Your only competition's in your primary. That's where the extreme voters turn out. All these politicians in Congress in Washington, D.C., and in many state houses only care about the most extreme wing of their voter base. And that's American politics in 2018. And it's not going to change until we fix it.
Yeah, I mean, look, I like the summit. I love this interview because I want to show, that's the whole point of this show, Rebel Headquarters, to show you guys how you can fight back. And so this is one of the ways. Max, let me turn to you again. So historically, the Republicans have beat up Hollywood, liberal Hollywood, and they do that as a tactic. They say liberal media, so the media, it's like working the refs, so that the media doesn't tell people the facts, etc. But now it seems like Hollywood's kind of taking a little bit of a turn, going, you know what, I don't give a damn what you think. So Jennifer Lawrence is going to this thing, you're going to this thing, a couple of other actors. And you get a sense in Hollywood like, well, I'm done trying to appease those guys. Let's actually go and fight and try to fix the system.
Well, I think the energy is starting to get directed, and people are getting very specific. I think partisanship is a huge problem. I listen to a lot of conservative radio and hear kind of the word association that goes on. So all of a sudden it's this conflated view of Hollywood that I don't like. But I think it is kind of this, it's sexy to be an activist again, if that makes sense, but it's not for that reason. People are understanding that, especially with social media, that the actions that they take have huge reverberations, and that this is really the time to step forward and take an action you believe in, because it has an effect and we need it. And like you said, critics be damned, because again, I would like to reach out to people who are beyond my community. I would like to go across party lines from where I am, and I can really only have that chance if I go out of my comfort zone and really get vocal about what I believe in.
Right, and some of the national Republican politicians and national Democratic politicians and some of the conservative talk show hosts say, oh, no, corporations are human beings and money is speech and they should be able to spend unlimited dark money, but they're a tiny minority. They're all over television, but they're a tiny minority of the country. 93% of us, Republicans, Democrats, and independents, think that these politicians are serving their donors and not their voters, and that we got to fix that. So last question for you, Josh. So what are the different ideas that are going to be discussed here? So obviously Wolfpack thinks we should do a convention to get the amendment. What are some of the other thoughts?
Well, there's other people who think we should slog it out and get a constitutional amendment by getting 3/4 of the legislature or 2/3 of the legislature and then 3/4 of the states to ratify, as some amendments have seen in years past. We're going to be talking about gerrymandering. What's the best way to do it? How do you craft it? How do you sell it to voters? How do you pass it at the legislative level if you're lobbying legislators and politicians to do it, or through ballot initiatives? We're going to be working on how to pass open primaries and how to protect it so that everybody votes in every election. You don't just have Republican primaries and Democratic primaries. You're going to have the same thing with ranked choice voting, a brilliant method of voting that exists in several other countries, many cities in the United States, about a dozen, but it's hard to pass and it's hard to get it implemented and it's hard to protect it. So we're going to be talking about those thorny issues about how do you do it. We're going to talk about how do you become a volunteer? How do you get to work in your community? How do you start a chapter of Represent Us or Wolfpack? We're going to talk about getting behind campaign finance and ethics and disclosure laws, and what are the best recipes for those kinds of reforms in your community? What are the real problems you're having in your city, your county, your state? And what are the best remedies that are actually winnable? And that's the key instructive word, winnable. And then how do you do it? How do you find the best experts to help you get there? And they're going to all be at the summit February 2nd, 3rd, and 4th, less than a month away at Tulane University in New Orleans. Join us.
All right, Josh Silver, Max Carver, thank you so much for joining us at Rebel Headquarters. We really, really appreciate it.